I once saw a man in Alberta stand up and say, I think that Alberta is so far out of being able to communicate with the rest of Canada that what I think you should do is break away and become the 51st state in the Union. And I busted out laughing because I thought that was the funniest thing I had ever heard an American say. It was Peter Ziehan say to a crowd of people. And they didn't laugh out of it. Because they took it as serious, and he was saying it as serious. So that's like one of those blending points, maybe jumping off of the humor, but going into Alberta. Have you ever heard anybody say, Alberta, you should break away from Canada and become the 51st state?
Yeah, you hear it. You hear it lots. There's a lot of stuff, where you hear like I'll hear a lot of Americans be like, if only we had BC and then we could get straight up to Alaska and then it's all connected and everything, right? And there's a huge people want to try and make a huge movement here in Canada right now. Wexit or the Western Federation, where we basically cut the country at Manitoba. For people that don't know Canadian geography that well, I mean, it's basically halfway through Canada. They want to cut it in half, and the whole western part of the country, they want that to be its own country kind of thing, whatever, right? And that's a lot of people are jumping onto that train because there's a very serious political division in Canada with East versus West kind of thing, and you can really see it in poll results and election results. Our last election was a prime example of it, where if you look at an electoral map of ridings, you could see where Western Canada turns into Eastern Canada. It turned into our Liberal government supporters, and Western Canada did not support them whatsoever, kind of thing, right? And it's the way the population works in Canada as well is pretty challenging too, because our population demographics are in Quebec and Ontario, which is Eastern Canada, which is where our government is run from. And that's what decides what runs our country is basically those two provinces, because that's where all the population is, right? When you get out into Western Canada, it is a very, very sparsely populated part of Canada, right? So you've got a part of Canada that's handling a lot of your resource management in Canada out in Western Canada, and then you get an eastern part of Canada that's handling a lot of your industry parts of Canada. So you get your bigger population that decides what government you have, and the eastern part of it that's handling the industry part of it, and then the western part of it kind of just goes with whatever government the east elects, and then handles your resource side of Canada. So if it goes too long where Western Canada is not represented properly in Eastern Canada, you get this East versus West kind of thing happening lots. I hear of that happening in the States a little bit too, where the Eastern states versus Western states is kind of the same kind of mentality or thing, right?
Yeah, the coast versus the middle, right? They call the middle the flyover country. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's like, it's not quite the coast versus here kind of thing, because Western Canada is very, sparsely populated. But I mean, the U.S. obviously, like, dense population down both coastlines, right? So, yeah. But yeah, it's interesting how that happens. But when you say Alberta separating or turning into the 51st state or whatever it is, you hear a lot of this stuff getting thrown around a lot of the time. I hope that somehow we can find a way to talk to each other across Canada. It's maybe a big part of what I'm trying to do is to try and there's a lot of people in your Ontario, Quebecs, and out into the maritime provinces of Canada here that work in agriculture and a lot of different things. I'm shocked how much support I'm starting to get from those provinces, which is it's actually it's a great thing to hear, because you realize that not everybody's the same out there. There are agriculture people and rural people everywhere across Canada. So now I guess the big question is, how do you start making your way into some of these, rural areas, urban areas that are, that maybe are not sharing the same mindset as the rest of everybody? And how do you get those people not to agree with each other, because everyone doesn't have to go through life agreeing with each other or what's happening, but it's important that everybody go through life and see each other's sides of the argument and understand it. And I think that's a real big division that we have. And that's not just in Canada. You can see it in the States, in Europe, everywhere. There's two very different opinions that happen. And no matter what, everyone's right on their side of the opinion kind of thing. And if there's no dialogue in between that, you really spin your tires a lot, right?
Yeah, and if the city world doesn't have somebody in the country making that information approachable to them, like through humor, they're not going to get it, because people
Mm-hmm.
don't make decisions based on facts, right? You could show up with, 10,000 page document with all the graphs describing why everything you're saying is exactly true. But if people don't feel like it's true, they're not going to. And if you use humor just to batter the other side, then they're going to feel that battering, and they're not going to laugh at your jokes, which puts you in a weird position, because your stuff is really funny. The stuff that you do that goes big is political, and politics is picking a side in a way. So
Yeah.
recently there was a Canadian gun ban, and you put out a video about this. Tell me about the Canadian gun ban, and then what you decided to put out into the world.
Yeah, it's a little bit terrifying what actually happened with that gun ban. So it was done through Oregon Council and regulation. So essentially, it was not debated in the House of Commons, which is how how our democracy is set up to work here in Canada and most places that are democracies here now. It was kind of done behind the cover of the COVID-19 pandemic, what's happening right now, which is it's kind of the part that scared me the most about what happened, is just basically have a democratic government, which our current government's a minority government as well. And the way our population works, maybe I won't get into that because we could go on forever about that, but it's a minority government. And they passed this basically just by stroking a pen and saying, this is it. It's about the closest thing to a dictatorship you could possibly get, what just happened in a free democratic country, right? Which is terrifying.